thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. I think we've got a great group with us today, and I'm sure they can provide some wonderful insight. Just by way of background, I've been in equity research for over 15 years now, and for the first time that I can recall, my friends and family find what I do very interesting. So coverage of the cannabis space was a big part of why I joined Echelon a ways back, and it's been a wild ride to be sure. So the theme for today's panel is, of course, how can Canada maintain its leadership position in the world of cannabis on a global basis? And I think it's a good idea to start with a discussion or perhaps a question around what is unique about Canada and Canadian companies in a global context, and what are some of the advantages that Canadian companies bring to bear when it comes to the cannabis space? And maybe, Mark, if I could ask for your thoughts to start us off with.
Yeah, thank you very much, and great to be here. It's a great question, and if you look at the stage here, you have 4 producers who have been around a while in the Canadian system, and frankly, we're very fortunate. We, everybody's worked very hard. They built a business. That's not easy, but we also got in at the right time and got a little bit of luck. And it's that timing, I think, for us as Canadian companies and for Canada in general that I think is such a big deal, right? We, people have been growing cannabis for forever, and people have been growing good cannabis forever. But to grow good cannabis at this type of scale, under this type of regulatory environment, is unprecedented. It's really never ever happened until this great Canadian experiment. So, there are now 80 or 90 licenses in Canada to do that. There's still probably only a dozen, maybe 20 Canadian companies who have that long-standing experience, and that is an incredible advantage. And of course, it's not an advantage if nobody cares, but people do care. If you look around the world, jurisdiction after jurisdiction is sort of cascading into this medical marijuana system, and they're all very different. Some are only oils or only CBD, and some are difficult, some are easy. But the one core thing that they're all doing is looking back to Canada. Governments are looking back to Canada, and at our Smiths Falls facility, we've had dozens of different groups from other countries come through, from other governments, looking at the Canadian production system, which we're all a part of, and there's simply nothing like it. And we can't be complacent. There will be new competitors from around the world that come up, but today, that moment is really there for Canada, and nobody has the experience we have to put out to the world.
That's great. Thank you for that. And maybe, Greg, if I could ask for some additional thoughts on that front.
I mean, certainly what we've seen, as Mark outlined, we're in a leadership position, and when other markets or jurisdictions are looking to build their framework, they're both looking at the regulatory structure that we have here in Canada, and then as we are approached by other companies that are looking to build out in other jurisdictions as well, they're looking to understand more about how we produce things. Mark was outlining that producing at scale, it's one thing to grow on a small level, but to produce on a commercial, industrial scale and to process that product and test that product is really challenging. And I think, the learnings and the advantages that the companies that go back that are on stage here, as well as a number of others that have been in this, since the program started back in the early days of 2014, have a very unique advantage in terms of positioning ourselves not only with the Canadian marketplace, but globally. And that expertise and the ability to export that intellectual property and know-how is very unique, because the world has been watching our medical program, and moving forward is going to look and see how we roll out our adult recreational program. So, while most of Europe is either just starting out with current medical programs, we expect to see down the road them moving forward with adult recreational programs as well. So Canada will continue to have that one step up on other markets and be seen as a global leader.
That's great, and I think it dovetails into my next question. When you mentioned Europe in particular, and this one, I guess if we could start with Brad. When you think about expanding internationally, what should investors be looking at in terms of a company's international expansion plan, and what are your criteria when you're looking at potentially investing in another market?
Most of the countries that are coming online are starting medical, and so we've been very strategic about our positioning. and we're leveraging our medical positioning to enter those countries. And so typically when you go into one of those countries, you're looking for somebody with that kind of experience and that alignment with respect to what your positioning is and how you want to enter that market. And so when we go international, we're looking typically for pharma partners, and that we're leveraging that positioning around the world right now. And then, of course, what we're able to do when we're in there, our product, because we're standardized, it stratifies both medical and rec. And so once, if rec opens up within those countries that we enter medically, we're happy to participate in that rec business as well because we've got standardized product. And so when you look at Canada, to reflect on your last question, Canada is known for food, pharma, and tech. And for us to leverage that internationally is to our advantage right now.
And Chris, if I could ask for your thoughts when you look internationally, how do you approach that?
Yeah, I think a lot of us have a similar point of view on where we want to go next and what the regulatory framework is on where we want to go next. I've been fortunate enough to launch over 13 different products in practically every single country around the planet, and been able to create sales revenues of north of $5 billion for some products, and it always comes down to the same three things. Success comes down to can you produce a product that is significantly differentiated from everybody else? And is it differentiated in a meaningful way that people want to buy it? And can you protect it? Do you have intellectual property that allows you to license it, distribute it around the world without other people copying it? So I think a lot of us have the same matrix of here's where we want to go. But what we're going to bring into those markets, I think, is something that all Canadian companies should be thinking about. How can we bring something that is unique and different? Because the Germans are going to figure out how to grow cannabis, and so are all these other countries. So it's really about what are the differentiated things we're going to bring to them because of our head start that we're going to compete on. I think that's an important. That's how at Emerald we look at it.
Excellent. And of course, I don't think we can really talk about international markets without addressing the really big elephant in the room, or at least to the south, the United States, and recent developments there. So when we look at the U.S., of course, most recently we saw the U.S. Attorney General rescind the Cole memo by way of what's now called, I guess, the Sessions memo, and that was seen as adding a bit of risk to the U.S. market and the risk of increased federal prosecution. So, what do you think that means? And if I could start with you, Greg, what do you think that means, perhaps for investors looking at the U.S. market and how Canadian companies might alter their international expansion plans around that?
Well, I think there's two key things. One is that certainly, we have a big investor base in the U.S. and all the companies on stage here do as well. So. And I think with this rescinding the Cole memorandum, what we've seen to date is, a more of a focus back onto investments in Canadian companies because, whether or not you're traded on the CSE or TSX or TSXV, we're legitimate regulated countries under a regulated framework that investors look to and say, this is a market that we want to invest. I know in particular for ourselves, we work closely with U.S. investors in terms of assisting them through that process if they have any kind of legal or regulatory hurdles they want to go through in the process. I think in the global scale, though, what it does, again, it continues to amplify our opportunity to take advantage of being a global leader as we see hurdles that continue to happen in the U.S. And having a state-by-state system where there may be potential challenges from a legal jurisdictional perspective. All it does at the end of the day is put Canadian companies in a much better position to maintain our leadership position and to build off of it globally. So, I think, but, again, from a U.S. investor perspective, I can't speak to individual U.S. investors, but what we have seen and continue to see is a big influx of U.S. investors into Canadian domiciled companies or Canadian companies listed on the Canadian exchanges, certainly.
Excellent. Brad, would you like to add any color to that?
I would love to. we're engaged in the States in a different way. We've licensed IP into the States, and we thought we'd be okay within that framework. But again, they've taken the position that any revenue derived through the United States is proceeds of crime, and so we're working through that right now. And I think we're boxing out that piece of our revenue, and we're taking the compliant approach. And so we're going to be out of the States as well.
Excellent.
And I think, just to add, in any other sector, the idea that you would go into somewhere where it's a federal crime to do an activity, nobody would think of doing it, right? And so what happened is people did it. Publicly listed companies went in and conducted criminal activity in the U.S. It created a whole set of chaos, which has led to things getting worse. So things that otherwise would have been common sense, sure, you can license something down to the U.S., suddenly came under more scrutiny because people were doing much worse things. So I think, as a sector that's trying to build credibility, trying to tell investors it's safe to invest in us and do things internationally, I think it's a shame to see sort of some of the chaos about the cross-border stuff in the U.S.
And we agree. That's why we've taken that position as well.
That's great color. I just in keeping with the theme, of course, with the event and talking a bit about the technology angle. Up until recently, I think most of the companies in the space had focused on straightforward cultivation, and it's only kind of recently, I think, that companies are starting to transition their story and their priorities more towards things like value-added products, new product development, and using technology as well in different areas of or different facets of their operations. So, Chris, I'm wondering if you could give us your thoughts on the importance of technology in the cannabis space and how you see it being used going forward.
Yeah, sure. What a great question for this audience in this room, because this being a technology conference, I'm sure as I discuss this, people in the audience are going to have their own ideas on what kind of new tech can be applied in this space. The fact is that because cannabis has been illegal for 100 years, we just haven't applied the technology to it yet. So we have this whole basket of really cool tools like genomics, genetics, high throughput screening, metabolomics, randomized controlled trials, patenting. I could go on. And we just have not applied these tools to this industry because it's not been allowed. And these tools were developed for a very specific reason. It's because they produce great products, consistent products that are purpose-built for a use, they're safe, and they're effective. And so we're starting to apply that kind of technology in this space. And just to make it a little more real and personal, what do I mean? So at Emerald, as an example, we have a product that's called THCA. It's a precursor to THC. It's non-psychoactive. And we're using randomized controlled trials, animal and human, to study the impact of it, and patenting as we go along. There's another product where we've used genetics and selective breeding to develop a specific plant that only grows a very specific cannabinoid that we're interested in. So it's that kind of application. And I think that when you apply that kind of technology in cannabis, we're not just converting a black market then into a legal market. It's way more than that. It's brand new product classes. And these product classes can sell $5 billion, $1 billion a year per product. It's not just as a whole market. And I think that's a point that a lot of people miss when they're looking at the cannabis market today. They're thinking, it'll just flip over from black market to regulated, and that's what it's going to look like. It's not. It's going to be way bigger than that, because we're going to apply, and all of you are going to apply cool tech to this space, and we're going to make it way more interesting than that.
Great. Mark, can I ask you to dive in and add some color on your end?
Yeah, I think, very, very well said. It's a lot of fun when we watch, guys like DNA Genetics who we're partnered with and have been, breeding cannabis that old school style, look, smell, and all that, team up with our PhD teams who are trying to do gene sequencing, et cetera, and to watch the outcome, it's actually very, very, very exciting. I think on the automation and the technology front, again, we've all built this incredible expertise in cannabis. And, when you're talking 10,000 square feet, 20, 50, 100, you can do a lot of manual things. When you're starting to talk about 1 million square feet of production, 2 million, 3 million, automation's table stakes, right? I mean, so press releases, who's got the most sophisticated operation, et cetera. It's just sort of flowery language, right? If you're not running an automated growing system at this point in the game, some will be better, some will be worse, but that's table stakes. You need to be doing that. I think where the real exciting part comes, in addition to a lot of the items mentioned here, is everything that happens after the growing, right? Because that's where there's a lot of new technology, again, being taken from whether it's pharmacy, whether it's oil, whatever it is. But again, processing 2 million square feet of product on a regular basis and doing it efficiently and creating new products. And that's where I think you'll start to see some real exciting stuff happen beyond just the idea of whose grow looks better than the next guy's.
Excellent. Greg, do you want to add any thoughts on that front?
Yeah, a couple. I think, as Mark said, I mean, it is about kind of automation, scaling, structural. I mean, this is a commercial industry producing at commercial scale. I think a couple of examples that we're investing in technology. So we're working with a local university on the East Coast to look at microwave-assisted extraction. The extraction process through supercritical CO2 today can take hours, and using microwave, extraction and supplementing that can take minutes. So you're talking about just your throughput times, everything you can do from a technology perspective that can, it is about plant processing, right? Because the plant is the starting point. It's, it's not only from a product development side what you do, but it's also how you process it and what your end product is. And I think those are critical aspects. So that's an area we're very focused on today. And I think, the other is that, we're looking at kind of whole user experience and systems. And I think you're going to start to see more happen in terms of both medically and adult recreational side of kind of how do you integrate that with technology. So certainly that's kind of one of our key aspects going forward, and being able to integrate that to kind of give feedback to medical patients using technology, but also to kind of have that interaction in terms of from a technology basis back to the whole experience that people have.
Great. Brad, did you want to?
Yeah, I think, well said by everybody. I think the unique value proposition here is beyond the grow. We're going to get into designer cannabinoids, unique dose forms. And, we're formulating right now with our pharma partner. We're going in terra-coated capsules, long form release, patches, sublinguals, et cetera, for the pharma side. But I think a lot of that unique technology can apply to the rec side as well. So, really exciting times when you look at both sides of this coin. And again, never before has anything ever stratified medical and rec. So, the opportunity here to apply technology on both sides is amazing for us. So we're really excited about it.
Chris, do you want to add anything on this point, or?
No, I think it's been well covered.
Everybody's-
This is so exciting. I mean, we haven't even talked about blockchain. You can go out there and talk about blockchain, but there's a great application of blockchain into this space. This immutable public record used to track cannabis from from seed all the way through sale. Who's going to want to know that? Everybody. Governments are going to want to know. Patients are going to want to know. Doctors. The tax department's going to want to know. Everybody's going to want to know. Yeah. And so please come and talk to all of us about applying your tech in this space, because there is so much to do, and it's a whole lot of fun.
Excellent. We got through our plan questions, so I think we've got time for one or two more. So I just wanted to bring it back to the international discussion and just kind of reverse the flow. We talked a lot about opportunities for Canadian companies outside of Canada, but maybe we could talk a little bit about the potential risks that perhaps you see on the horizon, risks or benefits perhaps of companies from outside of Canada looking to penetrate the Canadian market, either as competitors for capital or competitors for product development or things along those lines. So to put you on the spot, Mark, do you want to start us off there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's two ways to look at it. There's the growers, and then there's all the sort of the value add side. So, Israel, for example, they've had very sophisticated R&D and technology development in cannabinoids for a long time, and where they have sort of fallen short is their government essentially limited them from doing any sort of international stuff, and that's changing. So again, they don't have the scale or anything like that, but they've been thinking about this for a long time, and they have a lot of great, IP to layer on, and they're going to start coming at markets, and they're going to start trying to do these things that we're all talking about to have better value add than the next guy. So I think that's a legitimate threat. What I think is a bit of a red herring is this idea that people are going to set up giant growing ops in fill in the blank, Uruguay or wherever it is, and export all over the world. I think if you look in Canada, the level of regulatory rigor that's applied, or in Germany or anything like that, it seems unlikely they're just going to accept that we'll take product from Uruguay if it passes a test. So I think that's a threat if that happens to certainly us as we've invested in Canada. I think it's less likely. I think the greater risk is a whole world of very smart people who are starting to do a whole lot of research in a very exciting area.
Excellent. Brad, do you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, as Mark says, there's two ways to look at it. There's the process side and there's the growth side. I think as these countries go medical, there's an opportunity for us to go vertical in those countries as well. So we're just as much as a threat to everybody else going in on that side of things, because we've been 5 years in this business, 6 years in this business, some of us, and have been through many pitfalls. So for us to establish over there, we're faster to market over there. We can walk through those processes, and we've got that regulatory under our skin already, and so we understand how to work within those frameworks. And so for somebody to come back over the other side, the regulatory framework is not what it seems from the outside. It's not as easy as just growing it and selling it. So for them to get into the market, there's a big learning curve, and I think again, it's not as big of a threat as in my eyes, at least, anyhow.
One I think final question that I'd like input from everyone on, and if you could think about it in terms of 30 words or less. What do you think? Obviously, this is a market that's been full of surprises already over the last 6 months. So, when you think about the surprise that could come out of nowhere in 2018, where do you think, positive or negative, where do you think that surprise could come from, and what do you see as being that thing that could really surprise or raise some eyebrows in the space? I'll start with you, Greg, because you're right beside me.
I think certainly. I don't think it should come as a surprise to people, but it may surprise people. I think, Mark alluded to this earlier about, there's a lot of new companies coming to the space. It's going to be challenging for them to establish a market position. We're brand leaders. We've had extensive experience over time. So again, I don't know necessarily if it's a surprise to us, but it certainly may be a surprise to a number of people in the market that many of these new companies will really face big hurdles.
Great. Brad?
Yeah, I'm echoing Greg. I think that's a similar resonance.
Excellent. Chris?
I'd say the upside surprise is going to be when Canadians start to understand that all cannabis is not psychoactive. So when people think about cannabis or marijuana, they think about psychoactivity, and it is in its raw form, but there's many forms that are not. And I think so that'll be a surprise on the upside. The surprise on the downside, I think I'm a bit worried about some of the very small producers who are complaining about regulatory burden, taking some shortcuts. From everybody on the stage here, we look higher than the regulatory standards, and we're producing and doing things above that standard. There's people coming from the other direction, and I'm concerned that they might spoil the well if they don't do things properly.
Yeah, if everything goes according to plan, in 2018, Canadians will, for the first time, experience cannabis either first ever or in a completely new legal manner. And it has to be a good experience, right? You have to make sure that you know the brands, you know what they stand for, you know when to pick an indica versus a sativa, a THC versus CBD, and all of these things. So you need a clerk that understands it. You need a regulatory environment that lets people have an honest conversation. And if you walk into a Soviet-like store and nobody knows anything and it's all the same package and you pick something and have a shitty experience, that's just bad. It's bad for us. It's bad for Canadians. It's bad for cannabis policy.
Excellent. Well, I think that's great. That's excellent color from everyone, and I think I could speak on behalf of the conference, thank you very much for your time and your insight, and I really appreciate the color on the questions. Some of them may have been a little bit out of left field, but I think this entire space sometimes can come out of left field. So you're all accustomed to having to pivot very quickly based on developments in the space. So certainly appreciate your thoughts, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.